We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we are now back at the Apex in Vegas for UFC Vegas 12. This will be a historic event as we will see Anderson Silva inside the octagon for the very last time as he headlines this event against Uriah Hall. With Khabib retiring last weekend and Anderson retiring this weekend, it's sad to see two of the best fighters to ever grace the octagon sailing off into the sunset. Welcome to the fight game. But just before we get into the breakdowns, the Golden Gamble Challenge at MMAPlay365 has also come to an end as Fight Island again comes to an end for now at least. We won the challenge over the 5 events as we profited 1.5 units in total. It was a fun challenge. Thank you to everybody who took part, and it's definitely something that we'll look to do again in the future. Last weekend was a decent event for us overall. We did drop on Jared Cannonier, who was one of our recommended unofficial bets, and we also dropped the dog of the week in Alexander Yakovlev. But we profited very marginally on the official bets with a 5% return on investment, and we did have 2 of our 3 pre-made parlays win, along with 9 out of the 12 parlay pieces winning too. Remember, we've got multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website for all the UFC betting advice you'll ever need. We also have various subscription lengths and options too, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights in the main event. We've got Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva. Uriah Hall currently the minus 225 favourite. The comeback on Silva at plus 185 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I do think we've got some slight value sitting with Uriah Hall at minus 225. I would have expected the line to be a little bit higher, but name value with Anderson Silva, the fact that he's a fan favourite as well, in his last fight, his retirement fight, I do understand why some money is coming on him and he isn't being totally disrespected in this spot. As for where the betting line moves, I do think that we see some fluctuation. I can definitely see a case where money's coming in on Uriah Hall at minus 225. Maybe that pushes him up to minus 250. But at some point, it's going to hit that brick wall that I speak about all the time. And I think once it hits that brick wall, we will start seeing some money coming back in on Anderson Silva. But ultimately, I think the line, the odds are going to close roughly where they're sitting at right about now come Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out though, unfortunately, for as much as I love Anderson Silva, he's an absolute legend. He's a Hall of Famer, and he's a fighter that we've all enjoyed watching over the years. A phenomenal fighter, elusive. He was a dominant champion for years and years at the middleweight division as well. So, like I say, for as much as I love Anderson Silva, I do think that he's in a very difficult spot here with Uriah Hall. The first thing to mention is the fact that Silva has come out and said that this is his retirement fight. This will be the last time that he steps inside the octagon and fights in the UFC. So historically, those type of fighters that have claimed that it's the retirement fight before stepping inside the cage haven't done too well and haven't fared too well in getting that win at the end of the night. And like I say, stylistically, he's fighting someone like Uriah Hall, who I don't believe is going to stand there starstruck like we have seen with some other opponents for Anderson Silva. These fighters that have watched Silva growing up, got into mixed martial arts because of Anderson Silva, made it to the highest level of the sport, and then stepped inside the cage. With him, we have seen some fighters look a little starstruck, which makes them freeze up a little bit. Their activity, the volume isn't always there, but I don't think Uriah Hall is going to be that type of fighter. I don't think he's going to be a fighter that stands in front of Anderson Silva and gets starstruck and lets Silva get up on the numbers of volume. I think Uriah Hall's going to be aggressive. He's an aggressive fighter anyway. I think once he steps inside the cage, the fact that he's fighting Anderson Silva, I don't think will be a factor. I don't think it'll register so much. I think he'll just fight how he normally fights. Uriah Hall is a good striker too. Obviously, he's not at the level that Anderson Silva was back in his prime, but from a striker versus striker perspective right now, I do think Uriah Hall is the more dangerous striker. I think he hits harder. I think he's going to pack himself full of volume in this fight. He's got a nice stinging jab as well. He seems to be developing a little bit as well, Uriah Hall. He went through a bit of a bad patch a few years ago, but recently he has started to look a little bit better. His technique's looking better. He's a lot more patient than what he once was. So if that big shot, that knockout blow isn't going to present itself straight away, he will be patient. Nice fundamentals now, good jab, good movement, lateral movement, and he'll keep himself active as well whilst in open space. You know, he won't be inactive inside the cage. And he does have to be careful with strikes coming back in from Silva, because Silva is still going to be competitive in this fight for sure. Silva's still going to be landing on him. Silva was throwing high kicks at Jared Cannonier until Cannonier ultimately buckled his knee. So Silva's still got something about him, and even in that fight with Israel Adesanya, Silva made that fight competitive, and Adesanya is one of the best fighters on the planet, so Uriah Hall can't go into this fight expecting that he's going to run through Anderson Silva, because he might be in for a rude awakening. Silva's still going to be competitive here, but ultimately I see Uriah Hall landing the harder shots. I think when Silva hits him, I don't think it's going to have the same effect as what it's going to have when Uriah Hall hits Silva. And remember, this is 5 rounds as well, so although Silva can go 5 rounds, I've got no doubt about that, I just feel that power over 5 rounds, Uriah Hall is probably going to find something that lands on Silva hard at some point over the 25 minutes period. And for Silva to win this fight, he's probably got to stay out at kicking range, not coming into boxing range with Uriah Hall. He's got to make sure that his movement is on point, the cage isn't getting cut off from Uriah Hall. He's going to predominantly be fighting on the back foot, in my opinion. Uriah Hall's an aggressive fighter and will be pushing forward at every opportunity. And if Silva tries to push forward and be aggressive on Uriah Hall, I think Uriah Hall will fight fire with fire. I think he'll happily accept that exchange of striking. And once he's started to land the harder shots again, I just feel that Silva in his head will feel, okay, well, if I push forward against Uriah Hall, he's just going to fire back at me hard. So I'll stay on my bike, I'll stay on the outside, I'll use my movement and try and pick off at him. Ultimately, like I say, over 5 rounds, I don't think that's going to work. Silva might take a round or two, but ultimately I do think Uriah Hall's going to be landing the big action strikes. I think Uriah Hall's going to be the one pushing the pace, forcing Anderson Silva back. From a judge's optics perspective, if it goes to a decision, that's going to look better for Uriah Hall. And I do think that Uriah Hall has got more chance of finishing this fight as well. I think he's more dangerous. For those reasons, I'm picking Uriah Hall to win this fight. But just to sign off on this breakdown, thank you, Anderson Silva, for everything that you've given us. I wish you all the best for the future. Happy retirement. And in the next fight, we've got another fun fight, which I think this one's going to be the people's main event. We've got Andre Fili versus Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell is currently the -145 favourite. The comeback on Andre Fili at +125 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I think the value actually sits with Andre Fili as the underdog. For as amazing as Bryce Mitchell has looked lately, I do feel like this is a big step up for him, and I actually expected Andre Fili to be the slight favourite in this fight, so for me the value is on the underdog. As for where the betting line moves, a lot of money has come in on Andre Fili over the last 24 to 48 hours. Bryce Mitchell was as wide as -175 at one point, obviously now at -145, so all that money has been coming in on Andre Fili. I do expect more money to come in on Fili, and it wouldn't surprise me if Fili went into this fight at +100, maybe even a pick'em. But as for how this fight plays out, like I say, I feel that this is a big step up for Bryce Mitchell, but he has looked amazing lately, and for that reason I'm not so surprised he's a favourite, because I think if he was the underdog, I think a lot of people would be slamming money on him as well. Mitchell has looked great lately. He's looked phenomenal on the mat too. He really looks like he's a new era type of grappler. He's constantly active on the mat. He's looking to set up crazy submissions. He loves to set up the twister submission as well, which we haven't seen many of those in the UFC. He looks really solid on the mat, and he's very tricky to deal with. I've always said that he's a tricky grappler to deal with, but he seems to be elevating those levels lately. However, what concerns me is the wrestling of Mitchell. He has got the fights to the mat in his last 3 fights. He tends to look for single legs, or he'll look to catch a kick, or he'll look to capitalise on a mistake or a slip from his opponent, and he'll get on top and roll that way. In his last 2 fights specifically, he's really dominated. He was able to get the fight to the mat pretty much whenever he wanted it. But without any disrespect to Matt Sales and Charles Rosa, their wrestling, especially the defense, isn't at the level of Andre Fili. Andre Fili is a very underrated wrestler, again, offensively and defensively. So for Mitchell to get Fili down, I definitely think it's going to be a lot tougher for him than what it was in his last 2 fights. Fili isn't an easy guy to take down. I do have slight concerns in regards to when Sadiq Youssef was on top of Fili. Fili did look like he was a little bit stuck. He did eventually get back up to his feet once. He was patient and he waited for that opportunity to explode back up to his feet, but ultimately he lost 2.5 minutes by being on his back in that round. He can't do that against Bryce Mitchell. If Mitchell does take him down, he's got to try and pop back up, because this is Mitchell's path to victory, getting on top of Fili and rolling. But like I say, Fili is an underrated wrestler. I don't think it's going to be as easy for Mitchell to get him down. I do think Fili's got the ability to scramble. I do think Fili's also got the ability to try and take Mitchell down. Again, Mitchell's difficult off his back as well. He's got good dexterity in his legs. He'll look to throw his legs up for a triangle or an armbar. From that, he'll either try and submit you or reverse position. But where the real difference lies in this fight, in my opinion, is the striking. There's a huge gap in skill here, and I do think that Fili is just light years ahead of Mitchell in the striking, on the feet. Obviously, Mitchell is developing from fight to fight, so it's possible that Mitchell looks better in the striking realm than what he has done in previous fights, but I don't think that from his last fight he's going to have developed that much that is on the level of Andre Fili when it comes to striking. Fili's a phenomenal striker. He's a switch stance fighter as well, so he's good from the orthodox stance. He can switch to the southpaw as well. He's got a good educated jab. He follows up with good straight punches as well, so if he's in a southpaw position, he will lead with what is normally his jab hand on the orthodox side, so he will lead with the straight left. But from the orthodox side, he'll throw that straight right down the barrel as well. And that's just his punches. His kicks just come at a phenomenal pace. They come in volume, they hit hard, he hits to the legs, he hits to the body, he hits to the head. His movement's good as well. When he gets inside boxing range, you'd normally expect somebody like Fili that's a long type of fighter that fights at a kicking range. You'd normally expect that type of fighter not to fare so well in boxing range, but Fili's got really quick hands and good in combinations as well inside boxing range. He will sting his opponents. He's durable as well. Even if you drop him, he will get back up to his feet. He recovers quickly. On the feet, I do think Fili is going to pose a lot of problems for Mitchell, and it's probably going to cause Mitchell to start maybe panic shooting takedowns. Panic shooting takedowns, desperation leads to Fili being able to stuff those takedowns and stop those takedowns a little bit easier, in my opinion. And if Mitchell is unsuccessful in getting Fili down to the mat, then I think that's going to make Fili grow in confidence even more. I think that's going to elevate that striking as well, and I really think that he's going to put it on Mitchell, hitting him with hard shots, with his hands, with kicks, and ultimately just racking up that volume. For me, this fight just comes down to, can Bryce Mitchell take Andre Fili down in at least 2 of the 3 rounds? Because if Mitchell does take Fili down, then I think he will have success and he'll probably win that round that he gets the takedowns in. But like I said before, Fili is an underrated wrestler. He's worked with Danny Castillo for years, so you know his wrestling's going to be on point. I think Fili's going to be able to prevent the takedowns in at least 2 of the 3 rounds. I think Fili wins a striking war as well. So to wrap it up, on the basis of Fili being the better striker, on the basis of Fili potentially being able to stuff the takedowns from Bryce Mitchell, I'm picking Andre Fili to win this fight. And then in the next fight, we've got Makhmud Muradov versus Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland stepping in on short notice as the -150 favourite. The comeback on Muradov at +130 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think there's value on Kevin Holland at -150. Before I jumped into the tape for this fight, I did lean Muradov, but after watching tape, I do think it's a good fight for Kevin Holland, and I do think -150 is playable. And as for where this betting line moves, it's interesting because Kevin Holland actually opened the underdog in this fight. It got steamed pretty much straight away. We had Muradov sitting at roughly +175, but since that, all the money came back in on Muradov, closing him to +130. And for now, it does seem like the betting line has settled a little bit. It seems from a public perspective, this current betting line's quite fair. I could see an argument for fluctuations on either side, but come Saturday night, I don't think that the betting lines will be too far off from where they're sitting right about now. But as for how this fight plays out, like I say, it's a really good fight, and I was leaning Moradov before I jumped into tape. Muradov is a fighter that's well-rounded, predominantly a striker. He puts together combinations really, really well. He throws from both sides as well, mixes in kicks to the legs, to the body, and when he gets into the pocket, he really unleashes solid combinations. He's an accurate striker. The thing is with Moradov is I found that he's quite hittable, so you can get at him. If you want to push the pace on him, you can move forward and you can land on him. Obviously, you've got to be careful of the counter because, like I said, he's a very good striker. But the thing is with Kevin Holland, Holland's striking style is very strange. It's elusive. It's packed full of movement. He also adapts really well inside the cage, makes the correct adjustments, and he's really tricky to deal with. He did have a close fight last time out against Darren Stewart. Stewart did a phenomenal job, especially in that third round, of taking Holland down. Holland surprisingly looked quite tired at the end of that fight. I can't remember the last time I saw Holland that tired in round 3. So that is definitely something to consider in this fight, but also you can make the argument that it might have just been a one-off. The fact that Stewart was trying to grapple with him, Holland said to Stewart in the fight that he was strong, so that might have taken its toll on Holland a little bit. But aside from that, Holland's just a really good fighter, and like I say, his style is very unorthodox and he's quite elusive and he throws from strange angles. And this is where I think he's actually going to win this fight, because you look at Muradov against Di Chirico. Di Chirico doesn't have that crazy movement that Kevin Holland has. He's more flat-footed. Like I say, less movement, less lateral movement. He's not as fast as Holland either. But Di Chirico made that fight quite close. Di Chirico was able to land on Muradov just from walking forward, just from engaging with him inside the pocket as well. And actually that decision, in my opinion, was very, very close. The judges scored it a unanimous decision for Muradov. I was expecting a split decision. The point being here, Kevin Holland moves a lot better than Di Chirico. Kevin Holland strikes better than Di Chirico. And I think Kevin Holland is just the more unorthodox fighter and a more durable fighter as well. So even if he gets hit, he can still come forward. I think this is going to be a problem for Muradov. Muradov has got to find the answers to deal with the way Kevin Holland fights, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to adjust and adapt to the level that Holland will inside the cage. I also don't like that when Muradov gets hit, he smiles, he wags his finger like it never happened, but it definitely did. And Muradov is also tired in round 3 in his last couple of fights as well. Not so much in the Trevor Smith fight, but definitely in the Di Chirico fight. He was slowing down towards the end. He did take that fight on short notice, so maybe you can give him a pass there. But ultimately, although I think that Muradov is the cleaner, crisper striker, I think Kevin Holland is going to be the fighter that lands more volume, that looks better in the judges' eyes, that's coming forward, clinching as well. I think Holland's going to have an advantage in the clinch. If Holland wanted to wrestle, that could potentially be a good plan B for him as well, should he need to. But the bottom line for me here is, I think both fighters might struggle to find a finish. So if I am correct in saying that, we're likely going to see the scorecards. I think Kevin Holland's volume, his activity and his movement will look better in the judges' eyes. And for those reasons, I'm picking Kevin Holland to win this fight. And in the next fight in the heavyweight division, we've got Greg Hardy versus Maurice Greene. Hardy's currently the minus 310 favourite. The comeback on Greene at plus 255 is the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the line is relatively fair. So for me, there's marginal value on Greg Hardy, potentially parlay value. As for where the line moves, I do think that we're going to see a little bit of fluctuation. I don't think we're going to see Greg Hardy up at minus 350, minus 360. I think that would be way too wide at this point. So minus 300, minus 310, I think is going to be roughly where the line closes for Greg Hardy come fight night on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out, I do think the fight favours Hardy. For me, Maurice Greene has got to get Hardy down to the mat. Greene's got an underrated grappling game. He's got good submissions. So if he can get Hardy on his back, then I think that's where Maurice Greene is going to have success. And he could potentially win the fight on the mat with either control time, or he might even be able to finish Hardy with a submission or with ground and pound. But I just don't think the likelihood of that scenario happening is a very high percentage chance. I think it's more likely the fight stays on the feet. I think Hardy is getting better in every facet of MMA. I think if Greene tries to take him down, I'm pretty sure that Hardy can defend takedowns, and I'm not saying that Greene can't get him down. I just think it's going to be difficult. On the feet, I think Hardy is turning into quite a decent striker, if I'm being honest. You look at that Volkov fight that he had, he was a lot more technical. Sure, he lost the fight and it was a decisive loss as well, but the fact that he took that big of a step up and he didn't look completely out of his depth in that fight, I think that speaks volumes to his development. When we're talking about the striking in this fight, I think that Hardy's going to be the more technical striker. I think he's the fighter that if he's patient, he can just point his way to a decision, or if he really wants to be aggressive, then he can come forward. And I think Maurice Greene's hittable, especially when he's facing an explosive fighter, an athletic fighter that can come forward and fire a barrage of powerful strikes at him. So for me, I think the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. I think Hardy could approach this fight in two ways and win. Like I say, you could either approach it being patient and win a decision, or he could take that really aggressive approach, come forward, be explosive, be athletic, and land something hard on Maurice Greene that knocks him out. Hardy hasn't knocked anybody out in a while, and I almost think it's only a matter of time before we see Hardy with another KO on his record. That could be Saturday night if he chooses that approach, that aggressive, explosive approach. Either way, I think with the fight potentially being won and lost on the feet, and Hardy having a couple of paths to victory there, I'm picking Greg Hardy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the very active Bobby Greene versus Thiago Moises. Bobby Greene currently the minus 280 favourite. The comeback on Moises at plus 240 is the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with Bobby Greene. He's a fighter that's really active. He's in form, he's looked good lately, and I think he's got a good stylistic fight ahead of him here against Moises. As for where the betting line moves, Greene has been as low as minus 240. He's been as high as minus 300. Over the last 24 hours, money has been coming back in on Moises, so he's now sitting at minus 280. So I think this trend will lead to a similar type of fluctuation throughout fight week. I think Bobby Greene will come in on fight night though at minus 300 or wider. As for how this fight plays out, like I say, I think Bobby Greene has got a really good stylistic fight ahead of him here. I think in his last fight, a fight that I was wrong about, Bobby Greene's wrestling looked phenomenal against Alan Patrick. I didn't think that Greene was going to win that fight in the way that he did. I thought if Greene was going to beat Patrick, it was going to be via strikes, but like I say, he looked great from a wrestling perspective. We knew that he had decent wrestling, but I just didn't think that the offensive wrestling would be enough to take Patrick down and control Patrick on the mat. So I think this is a big factor in this fight, because although Moises needs the fight on the mat to win, in my opinion, he needs to be on top. And Bobby Greene, offensively and defensively in regards to his wrestling, has looked super sharp lately. I don't think Moises' offensive wrestling is that great. I do think he has an ability to get fights down to the mat. But when we're talking about the wrestling and comparing it to Bobby Greene's wrestling, I just think Greene is light years ahead of where Moises is at in regards to the wrestling. So for me, if Moises tries to take Bobby Greene down, I'm not sure he's going to be able to get him down at all. I think Greene has got a couple of paths to victory here. I think Greene could even offensively wrestle and take Moises down. I'm not sure how dangerous Moises will be on his back. He does seem to be more of a top side submission grappler opposed to a bottom side. You know, I don't think he throws up the triangles and arm bars that's going to catch somebody like Greene. Maybe at worst in a scramble Moises can try and get Greene's back, but again, that scenario I just think is a low percentage likelihood of it happening. I think Bobby Greene could also win on the feet striking. Again, Moises isn't a terrible striker, but Greene is just a better striker. He's more difficult to deal with. He's unorthodox. He fires punches from the hip, so they're harder to see coming in. So ultimately for me, on the feet, I think Bobby Greene's going to look great. I think he's going to land volume. I think he's going to touch Moises up, could potentially hurt Moises as well. And if Greene wants to level change, drop down for a takedown and look to get the fight to the mat and spend some time on top of Moises, I think he's capable of doing that as well. The only position that Greene loses this fight in my opinion, is if he gets put on his back and he gets settled on his back, which is very difficult to do. So for all those reasons that I've just mentioned, the multiple paths to victory for Bobby Greene, I'm picking Bobby Greene to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Alexander Hernandez versus the returning Chris Gruetzemacher. Alex Hernandez is currently the minus 350 favourite. The comeback on Gruetzemacher at plus 290 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this fight, I do feel there's still value with Alexander Hernandez. I know it's a very wide line, but I think with Gruetzemacher coming off the layoff, which we'll touch upon very shortly, coupled with the stylistic advantages I believe Alexander Hernandez is going to have in this fight, I do think that that wide line is very justified here. As for where the betting line moves, it wouldn't shock me to see more money coming in on Hernandez. At this point, it's more likely to be parlay money than straight money, but once people start putting those parlays together later in the week, if they are including Alexander Hernandez, look to see Alexander Hernandez coming in at minus 370, minus 380, potentially even minus 400 or above. I think that's where the trend is going to go closer to fight night on Saturday night. But as for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned, I think this is a good stylistic fight for Hernandez, and I do believe the UFC know exactly what they're doing in this booking as well. I think they're putting somebody in there with Hernandez that he can look really good against, that can get him back on track and ultimately just give him the fight that he wants, because Gruetzemacher is more of a striker. He's quite well rounded in some respects, but he's definitely a fighter that loves to stay on the feet, apply pressure himself and apply volume in his fights. But with Hernandez, I feel he's going to hit a bit of a brick wall, because I don't think that Gruetzemacher has got the ability to put the pressure on Hernandez. I think it'll be Hernandez putting the pressure and the pace on Gruetzemacher, pushing Gruetzemacher backwards for long periods of this fight. I think Gruetzemacher is definitely a better fighter on the front foot opposed to moving backwards. I don't think he's anywhere near as effective moving backwards. So from a striking perspective alone, I think with the pace and pressure Hernandez is going to put on Gruetzemacher, he's going to be able to hit him with not just volume, but he's going to be able to hit him with hard shots as well. And then if Hernandez wants to mix up the wrestling, he can tie up with Gruetzemacher. I think he's going to have a strength advantage. From tying up with Gruetzemacher, he can start looking to get the fight down to the mat. Gruetzemacher, I don't think, can be rolled over too easily on the mat. Even though Davi Ramos and Chaz Skelly submitted Gruetzemacher still put up a good fight on the mat until the point where the better grappling just took over. So I don't think Hernandez is going to have a completely easy time on the mat. But when you talk about the wrestling, the relentlessness, the constant pressure, the chain wrestling and the takedown after takedown after takedown, I think that is a game plan that Hernandez could use here, and it could be used to make him look really good as well. Ultimately, with Hernandez in this fight, I think he's going to be the better striker. I think he's going to be the fighter putting the pressure on Gruetzemacher, setting the pace, controlling the distance. I think he's going to be the better grappler. I think he's going to be the better wrestler. I think he's going to be stronger in the clinch. I think that Hernandez has got the full package here to beat somebody like Chris Gruetzemacher, who I don't believe is a UFC caliber fighter. And honestly, for me, I think it would take a huge mistake and a completely dull, static performance from Hernandez for him even to have a chance of losing this fight. If that does happen, then there's serious problems for Hernandez, and he might even be facing the chopping block himself, but I don't see that scenario happening. I think Hernandez is going to look good on Saturday night. I'm picking Alexander Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got two newcomers. We've got Adrian Yanez versus Victor Rodriguez. Adrian Yanez currently the minus 330 favourite. The comeback on Rodriguez at plus 270 is the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with Adrian Yanez. I actually watched tape on this fight before the betting lines were released, and I expected to see Yanez roughly around minus 400, so at minus 330, I do think the value sits with Yanez there. And as for where the betting line moves, I do think we see more money coming in on Yanez than we do on the underdog in Rodriguez. Sure, it's an underdog shot with two UFC debutants, but when you actually watch the tape and break the fight down, it's very clear that Yanez is the better fighter in my opinion. There's just always those few question marks and red flags on the fact that he's a debutant, but I think Yanez should look good in this fight. I do think there's going to be more people at that betting window grabbing their tickets on Yanez than they will Rodriguez. As for how this fight plays out, I just think that Yanez, as I've already mentioned, is the better fighter. They're both predominantly strikers. I do think that Rodriguez is slightly more well-rounded though. he does look like he would search for a takedown more than what Yanez would. But with that being said, I don't think that Rodriguez's wrestling is overly prolific. He does prefer to strike. He's quite wild. He'll love to enter a brawl. And I think this is ultimately going to be his undoing in this fight, because where he's a wild fighter that will wing bombs and throw fastballs into every shot, Yanez, although he packs power himself, his boxing is so crisp. He will mix in the occasional low kicks, but his hands, his punching, his boxing is so good. And I think when Rodriguez comes in and he's looking to throw heat, get into a brawl and be really wild, I think he's going to leave openings that Yanez is going to capitalise on. I think Yanez is going to hit him with hard combinations, and I'm just not sure how many of those combinations Rodriguez will be able to take before he's laying on the canvas, looking up, waking up and seeing doctors over him. If Rodriguez decides to go down the wrestling route, I think that's probably his best path to victory, but I'm not convinced that he can win a fight via wrestling with the style that he brings to the cage as well. I think Yanez is going to land shots on him. I think he's going to land volume. He's going to hit him with hard shots. If Rodriguez doesn't go out, doesn't go unconscious, I think Yanez will comfortably win over 3 rounds. I'm picking Adrian Yanez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sean Strickland versus Jack Marshman, 2 fighters that are both coming off layoffs themselves. We've got Sean Strickland at minus 320, the comeback on Jack Marshman at plus 260 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I do think it sits with Sean Strickland. I know the line's really wide, but from a stylistic perspective and a skill set perspective, I just think he's the better fighter in this fight and the fighter that wins way more often than not. As for where the line moves, I do think we're going to see more money coming in on Strickland. It wouldn't shock me to see him again get closer to minus 370, minus 380, even minus 400 wouldn't shock me. I just feel he's in a really good fight, and I feel the public know that as well. The current trend tells you that he was minus 225, minus 240 in spots just a few days ago. Now he's sitting minus 310, so the trend is the money coming in on Sean Strickland, and I think that will continue the closer we get to fight night on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned, I think that Strickland is a much better fighter, and he's in a stylistic matchup here where I don't think there's going to be too much danger coming from his opponent in Jack Marshman. I'd be very surprised if this fight wasn't won and lost on the feet. Both fighters are predominantly strikers, and it's a little similar to the fight that I just broke down last with Adrian Yanez and Victor Rodriguez. We've got one fighter that's more technical and one fighter that's more of a brawler. Jack Marshman is what some people would describe as a technical brawler. He likes to come into range, throw big power, throw heat, wild combinations, left hooks, right hooks, uppercuts, just big power combinations inside the pocket. But then you've got Sean Strickland, who would prefer to keep the fight at range until at least when he gets his reads in and makes adjustments to get inside and start landing himself. He's got a really educated jab. He'll pop the jab out. He'll set up other attacks from that jab as well. If he hasn't got his reads in yet and he hasn't made his adjustments yet, and he's just waiting for the right time to get his timing down, he will just pop that jab out, no problem, with nothing else behind it until he makes those relevant reads. And that's something that I do like from a fighter, because it means that they remain active in spells that seems to be a little dry. But from a striking perspective, Strickland is definitely the more technical striker. He's the fighter that will land the more volume. Marshman has that negative strikes landed to strikes absorbed ratio, which is never a good look. And I think the longer the fight goes on, the more it slips away from Marshman, the more frustrated he gets. The more frustrated he gets, the more he comes forward looking for those big power punches and that one bomb, which for a technical striker like Sean Strickland, that's quite easy to see come in your way and deal with. I also think from a plan B perspective, I know I said I think this fight is going to be won and lost on their feet, but from a plan B, from Sean Strickland's perspective, I think that he's got wrestling in his back pocket, that he's going to be able to take Jack Marshman down should he want to do that. And I think if he has that path to victory, that's the easiest path to victory for him. The defensive wrestling is a big hole in Jack Marshman's game. He's got a 20% takedown defense rate, which isn't very good at all. And basically, if you're a good enough wrestler and you want to try and take Marshman down, the likelihood is is you're going to be able to take him down. Sean Strickland, I think, has got underrated wrestling. I don't think he's a prolific wrestler, but he's definitely more than capable, and he could definitely take Marshman down should he want to. And his topside grappling is decent as well. So if he can't find a finish on the mat and he just wanted to get some top control time, I think once you've got Marshman flat on his back, I think you can ride that round out and do enough on the ground to stop the referee from stepping in. So for me, I think it's a good fight for Sean Strickland. Unless he gets caught with one big punch that puts him out, I think he's going to land more volume should the fight predominantly take place on the feet. I think if he chooses to take him down, he's got that path to victory as well, and that would be the most successful path to victory in my opinion. And for all those reasons mentioned, I'm picking Sean Strickland to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jason Witt versus Cole Williams. Jason Witt currently the minus 145 favourite. The comeback on Williams at plus 125 as the underdog. As for where the value sits in this fight, I do think it's slightly with the favourite in Jason Witt at minus 145. The line does keep widening though. If it does get much wider, then I think the value will flip onto the other side with Cole Williams. As for where the betting line moves, all the action over the last few days has seemingly come on Jason Witt, who opened a plus 125 underdog. I do think that current trend continues, and I do think that Witt will close on Saturday night roughly around minus 150, minus 155, maybe even minus 160. As for how the fight plays out though, I do think it's going to be won and lost on the feet. Both fighters can mix it up. Both will look for sporadic takedowns, opportunistic takedowns, but both really lead with the hands, the boxing. Not too many kicks from either side, although Jason Witt does look to be a little more diverse. I've seen him throwing knees in the clinch and things like that, but yeah, predominantly they both lead with the hands. They're both strikers, and I just think Jason Witt is the better striker. Cole Williams, he starts in this karate stance while he's fresh. Then once he starts tiring a little bit, that karate stance isn't as bouncy anymore. It's more flat-footed. He's walking forward. He's got his hands down. He gets hit quite a lot as well. I really don't like how hittable he is. And one thing that Witt will provide is headshots. He will headhunt. He will look to punch you in the face as much as he can. He can apply a decent amount of volume as well. So if Cole Williams does slow down at the end of the first round into the second round, I do think that Witt's gas tank will push him across the finish line in this fight. Ultimately, for Cole Williams to win, I think he's going to have to knock Witt out. He's going to have to catch him with something. I don't think his wrestling will be good enough to take Witt down. I think if anybody gets on top, it is going to be Jason Witt. He does seem to have decent top control as well. I think Witt's just the better fighter here. I think he's going to land more volume on Williams. It wouldn't surprise me if he knocked him out, but if he doesn't and it goes to a decision, I think Jason Witt's just going to have done more over the 15 minutes. I'm picking Jason Witt to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the exciting newcomer Dustin Jacoby versus Justin Ledet. Jacoby's currently the minus 310 favourite. The comeback on Ledet at plus 255 is the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I'm not sure there's much value at all, if I'm being honest. I do think that Jacoby is the rightful favourite, but at minus 310, there's enough red flags and the fact that he's a debutant to be put off from laying the chalk. And as for where this betting line moves, I don't think it's actually going to move too much from where we're at right about now, and the reason being is I don't think there's going to be a whole host of people wanting to take that minus 310 shot on Jacoby, and I also don't think there's people going to be rushing to the betting window to lay money down on Justin Ledet at this point as well, who hasn't looked great for quite a while if we're being honest. So with that said, with the not being too much action is what I'm predicting. I don't think the betting line's going to move too much come Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out though, Dustin Jacoby is an exciting fighter. You can tell he's got a solid kickboxing background. He goes inside the cage, he'll throw volume, he'll throw heat, he'll look to knock you out, he'll throw in combinations as well, mixing in punches with his kicks. He's really fluid, he's really accurate, and you can tell he's just got that solid kickboxing base. I think that's going to be a big problem for Justin Ledet. Justin Ledet is a decent striker himself. He's quick, he's got good movement, he's got a nice jab, he's got really good technical fundamentals in his striking, but when somebody's in his face, pushing him backwards, won't let him breathe, won't give him any space, that's when Ledet starts to have issues. That's where he starts to struggle getting his own strikes off. And that's also when he starts absorbing damage as well, which is the last thing that you want to do against somebody like Jacoby. Jacoby's a really technically skilled fighter. I also like what I saw from Jacoby's takedown defense. I don't think he was tested in that Contender Series fight as much as what Justin Ledet could test that wrestling and that takedown defense, but he showed enough fundamentals, getting the underhooks, wide base, shrugging his opponent off, just doing the right things to defend the takedowns, enough to make me believe that he's not going to be easy to take down. So far this breakdown has sounded great for Jacoby, but this is where the red flags come in. In that Contender Series fight, he looked phenomenal in round 1. He started round 2 really well, but then his cardio just dropped off a cliff, and it's because he was throwing so many strikes, he just naturally tired. So for me, it seems like Jacoby's one of those type of strikers that is really skillful, but when he pours on the volume, he significantly reduces his gas tank and how far and how deep he can go into the fight. If he doesn't apply that much volume, then his gas tank will probably hold longer, but then he's given his opponents opportunities to come back at him and fire back at him. I didn't like how Jacoby dealt with how tired he was. With Ledet, I think Ledet will pour volume on if Jacoby lets him. If that happens, I think Jacoby will just be eager to get the strikes back, get the volume back and pour it back on Ledet, which could see Jacoby tire halfway through the fight, definitely into the 3rd round. If that happens, Ledet does have the cardio to carry 15 minutes and he will pour that pressure on in the 3rd round. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Jacoby tired in the 3rd round and Ledet to come back and finish him, even if he's down the first 2 rounds. So this is what I mean by the betting line. I think it's a little too wide considering the red flags that I've mentioned on Jacoby's cardio. But listen, there's every chance Jacoby goes into this fight and absolutely floors Ledet in round 1 and knocks him out, and then we don't even have to worry about the cardio. There's just enough red flags for me, enough question marks for me to not see too much value in the minus 310 line of Jacoby, but regardless, I'm picking Dustin Jacoby to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cortney Casey versus Priscila Cachoeira. Cortney Casey currently the minus 230 favourite. The comeback on Cachoeira at plus 190 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I do think the value sits with Cortney Casey. I think it's quite a good stylistic fight for her. She's the fighter with way more experience and she's shared the cage with much better opponents as well. As for where the betting line moves, more money has been coming in on Cachoeira. I think a lot of people are liking her as an underdog, but I think at some point, if Cortney Casey gets that low, maybe minus 200, minus 195, maybe minus 190, I think the tables will turn. I think more people will start to bet Cortney Casey, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Casey go into this fight minus 230 where she is now, maybe minus 240, potentially even minus 250. But if people are betting Cachoeira now, whilst Casey's minus 230, then that tells me that the odds are going to close roughly where they're at right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, I think it's a good fight for Cortney Casey. I think when you're looking from a striking perspective, Cachoeira is an aggressive fighter, a fighter that likes to get in your face. She loves to get into boxing range and she'll throw down. But Cortney Casey is a more reserved technical fighter that will pop a jab out, doesn't throw too many long combinations. They tend to be just 1-2 straight down the barrel, and I think that type of fighter is one that Cachoeira will struggle against, because Cortney Casey, with a movement on the feet as well, she won't allow Cachoeira to cut the cage off, which will allow Casey's lateral movement to take effect. And once she starts finding more and more space, I think she can just keep Cachoeira at the end of her punches, or if she even wanted to shoot in for a takedown and take Cachoeira down, I think that's a possibility as well. If she puts Cachoeira on her back, I do think Casey will be the more dominant grappler. I think she could ride Cachoeira out. I think she could get top control time, and I think she could potentially finish Cachoeira on the mat as well. I just think Casey is the better fighter wherever this fight goes. As long as she doesn't give Cachoeira what she wants, which is a brawl, then I think that she should win relatively comfortably. And Cortney Casey isn't the type of fighter to really engage in that brawl and give a fighter that type of fight. I think Casey is going to look comfortable on the night. I think she's going to be able to get the job done. I think she's been in there with the better level of opponents, and she should get her hand raised at the end of Saturday night. I'm picking Cortney Casey to win the fight. And in the final breakdown of the podcast, we've got Miles Johns versus the newcomer Kevin Natividad. Miles Johns currently the minus 170 favourite. The comeback on Natividad at plus 150 as the underdog. Now, as for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Kevin Natividad. I don't think that this is a bad stylistic matchup for him at all. And over the last 24 to 48 hours, all that money coming in has been on Natividad. He was as high as plus 175 just a few days ago. Obviously, as I've mentioned, now sitting at plus 150. So for me, the value is on Natividad. I think this is a spot where he could perform well. As for where the line moves, I do think that the trend continues, but just for a little bit. I think if we see Natividad down at plus 130, plus 125, I think at that point we will start seeing money coming back in on Miles Johns, because that would mean he would be around the minus 140, minus 145 line. So ultimately, I can see some money coming in on Kevin Natividad, but I think when it gets to a certain point, the money will come back in on Miles Johns. I think Miles Johns will close roughly at around minus 155 with the comeback on Natividad at around plus 135. As for how this fight plays out though, it's a very interesting fight. We've got Miles Johns, who last time out, he didn't really use any of his wrestling. He's got a solid wrestling background. He's got good takedowns. The problem you get with Miles Johns when he's using his takedowns, especially early in fights, is he can tire himself out. And if his gas tank does deplete in the fight, he's not out of the fight. He'll still push and work through. It's just his takedowns won't be as effective. His completion rate won't be as great. And it's just easier for his opponents to deal with that type of wrestling pressure coming at them. And Natividad, although this is, in my opinion, the best wrestler that he's faced, he has stuffed takedowns before. He has shown that he does the right things to keep the fights vertical. But as I've mentioned, the only real red flag I have here on Natividad is the fact that he hasn't had a Miles Johns try and shoot takedowns on him. Can Miles Johns take him down? Can Miles Johns ride out on top, spend time on top, get that top control time in, run the minutes down, win the rounds that way? Can he do it for 3 rounds because of the gas tank? You know, it's difficult because we won't find out until after we see this particular fight. But on the feet, I think Natividad is dangerous. I think he comes forward. His one real hole for me is that he doesn't check leg kicks, which is honestly really not good. Definitely not advised. And it's a real problem if he's fighting somebody that throws a lot of low kicks, which Miles Johns generally doesn't. So Natividad will walk forward, he will land volume, he's got power in his hands as well. I think if Miles Johns stands toe for toe with Natividad like he did with Mario Bautista, I don't think it'll end in the same way in regards to the knee, but I do think that Natividad will get off on volume on Johns. I think he'll hurt Johns, and that's ultimately where Natividad wins the fight. Johns for me has got to go back to his wrestling. He didn't use it against Bautista, and that was his best path to victory in that fight, which makes you question why didn't he use it. It also makes me think that he's probably learnt from his mistakes and he will use it here. But if he gets off on that wrestling early and he does tire out, Natividad will carry his cardio throughout 3 rounds. And this is ultimately why I'm settling where I am by picking Kevin Natividad, because the one real path to victory Miles Johns has, I don't believe he can do it for a full 15 minutes. Natividad is definitely going to have some success on the feet. All fights start standing. So for me, Miles Johns needs to be wrestling hard for 3 rounds, which I don't think he's quite got in his locker. For those reasons, I'm picking Kevin Natividad to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On The Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again guys, I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to our MMAPlay365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, we have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.